The H-caps cost $3 each, and you need at least three a day to get by. I was short, so I began working the hole with Roy. We would ride along, each looking out on one side of the subway car until one of us spotted a flop sleeping on the bench. Then we would get off the train. I stood in front of the bench with a newspaper and covered Roy while he went through the luscious pockets. Roy would whisper instructions to me. A little to the left, too far, a little back, there, hold it there. And I would move to keep him covered. Often we were late and the lush would be lying there with his pockets turned inside out. We also worked on the cars. I would sit down next to the lush and open a newspaper. Roy would reach across my back and go through the lush's pockets. If the lush woke up, he could see that I had both hands on the paper. We averaged about $10 a night. An average night went more or less like this. We started to work around about 11 o'clock, getting on the Uptown or IRT at Times Square. At 149th Street, I spotted a flop and we got off. 149th Street is a station with several levels dangerous for lush workers because there are so many spots where the cops can hide, and it's not possible to cover it from every angle. On the lower level, their only way out is by the elevator. We approached the flop casually as though we did not see him. He was middle-aged, sprawled against the wall, breathing loudly. Roy sat down beside him, and I stationed myself in front of them with an open newspaper. Roy said a little to the right, too far back, a little there, that's good. Suddenly the heavy breathing stopped. I thought of the scene in the movies where the breathing stops during the operation. I could feel Roy's immobility behind me. The drunk muttered something and shifted his position. Slowly the breathing started again. Roy got up. Okay, he said, and walked rapidly to the other end of the platform. He took a crumpled mass of bills from his pocket and counted out $8. He handed me 4. Had it in his pants pocket. I couldn't find a poke. I thought for a minute he was going to come up on us. We started back downtown. At 116th we spotted one and got off, but the flop got up and walked away before we could get near him. A shabby man with a wide, loose mouth accosted Roy and started talking. He was another lush worker. The fag scored again, he said. 2 notes and a wristwatch down at 96th Street. Roy muttered something and looked at his paper. The man went on talking in a loud voice. I had one come up on me. What are you doing with your hand in my pocket, he says. For Christ's sake, don't talk like that, Roy said and walked away from him. Fucking wrong bastard, he muttered. There aren't many lush workers around now. Only the fag, the beagle, and that tramp. They all envy the fag because he makes good scores. If a sucker comes up on him and pretends he's to feel his leg as if he was like he was a fag, those tramps at 103rd Street go around saying, "Goddamn fag," because they can't score. He's no more a fag than I am. Roy paused reflectively. Not as much, in fact. We rode to the end of the line in Brooklyn without spotting a single flop. On the way back there was a drunk asleep in a car. I sat down beside him and opened my paper. I could feel Roy's arm across my back. Once the drunk woke up and looked at me sharply, but both my hands were clearly visible on the paper. Roy pretended to be reading the paper with me. The drunk went back to sleep. Here's where we get off, Roy said. We better go out in the street for a bit. Doesn't pay to ride too long. We had a cup of coffee at the 34th Street automat and split the last take. It was $3. When you take a lush on the car, Roy was explaining, you got to gauge yourself to the movement of the car. If you get the right rhythm, you can work it out even if that mooch is awake. I went a little too fast on that one. That's why he woke up. He felt something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. At Times Square, we ran into Subway Mike. He nodded but did not stop. Mike was always worked alone. Let's take a run out to Queen's Plaza, Roy said. That's on the Independent. The Independent has special cops hired by the company, but they don't carry guns, only saps, so if one grabs you, run if you can break loose. Queen's Plaza is another dangerous station where it is impossible to cover yourself from every angle. You just have to take a chance. There was a drunk sleeping full length on the bench, but we couldn't risk taking him because too many people were around. We'll wait a bit, Roy said. Remember though, never pass more than 3 trains. If you don't get a clear chance by then, forget it no matter how good it looks. 2 young punks got off a train carrying a lush between them. They dropped him on the bench, then looked at Roy and me. Let's take him over to the other side, said one of the punks. Why not take him right here, Roy asked. The punks pretended not to understand. Take him? I don't get it. What does our queer friend mean? They picked up their lush and carried him to the other side of the platform. Roy walked over to our mark and pulled a wallet out of his pocket. No time for finesse, he remarked. The wallet was empty. Roy dropped it on the bench. One of the punks shouted across the tracks, "Take your hands out of his pockets," and they both laughed. "Fucking punks," said Roy. "If I catch one of them on the side line, I'll push the little bastard onto the tracks." One of the punks came over and asked Roy for a cut. "I tell you, he didn't have nothing," said Roy. "We saw you take out his wallet. There was nothing in it." The train stopped and we got on, leaving the punks there undecided whether or not to get tough. "Fucking punks think it's a joke," Roy said. "They won't last long. They won't think it's so funny when they get out on the island doing 5:29. We were in a run of bad luck," Roy said. "Well, that's the way it goes. Some nights you make $100, some nights you don't make anything." One night we got on the subway at Times Square. A flashily dressed man, weaving slightly, was walking ahead of us. Roy looked him over and said, "That's a good fucking mooch. Let's see where he goes." The mooch got on the IRT, headed to Brooklyn. We waited standing up in the space between the cars, and the mooch appeared to be sleeping. Then we walked into the car, and I sat down beside the mooch, opening the New York Times. The Times was Roy's idea. He said he made me look like a businessman. The car was almost empty, and there we were wedged up against the mooch with 20 feet of empty seats available. Roy began working over my back. The mooch kept stirring, and once he woke up and looked at me with bleary annoyance. A Negro sitting opposite us smiled. "The shine is wise," said Roy in my ear. "He's okay." Roy was having trouble finding the Pope. The situation was getting dangerous. I could feel sweat running down my arms. "Let's get off," I said. "No, this is a good mooch. He's sitting on his overcoat, and I can't get into his pocket. When I tell you, fall up against him, and I'll move the coat at the same time. Now, for Christ's sake, that wasn't near hard enough." "Let's get off," I said again. I could feel fear stirring in my stomach. "He's going to wake up." "No, let's go again." "Now." "What in the hell is wrong with you? Just let yourself flop against him hard." "Roy," I said, "for Christ's sake, let's get off. He's going to wake up." I started to get up, but Roy held me down. Suddenly gave me a sharp push, and I fell heavy against the mooch. "Got it that time," Roy said. "The poke?" "No, I got the coat out of the way." We were out of the underground now, and on the elevated. I was nauseated with fear, every muscle rigid with the effort of control. The mooch was only half asleep. I expected him to jump up and yell at any minute. Finally, I heard Roy say, "I got it. Let's go then." "No, what I got is a loose roll. He's got a poke somewhere, and I'm going to find it. He's just got to have a poke." "I'm getting off." "No, wait." I could feel him fumbling across my back so openly that it seemed incredible that the man could go on sleeping. It was at the end of the line. Roy stood up. "Cover me," he said. I stood in front of him with the paper shielding him as much as possible from the other passengers. There was only 3 left, but they were in different ends of the car. Roy went through with the man's pockets openly and crudely. "Let's go outside," he said. We went out on the platform. The mooch woke up and put his hand in his pocket. Then he came out on the platform and walked up to Roy. "All right, Jack," he said. "Give me my money." Roy shrugged and turned his hands out, palm up. "What money? What are you talking about?" "You know goddamn well what I'm talking about. You had your hand in my pocket." Roy held his hands out again with a gesture of puzzlement and deprecation. "Oh, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about your money." "I've seen you on this line every night. This is your regular route." He turned and pointed to me. "And there's your partner right there. Now, are you going to give me my dough?" "What dough?" "Okay, just stay put. We're taking a ride to town, and this had better be good." Suddenly the man put both hands in Roy's coat pockets. "You son of a bitch," he yelled. "Give me my dough." Roy hit him in the face and knocked him down. "Why you?" said Roy, dropping abruptly his conciliatory and puzzled manner. "Keep your hands off me." The conductor, seeing a fight in progress, was holding up the train so that no one would fall on the tracks. "Let's cut," I said. We started down the platform. The man got up and ran after us. He threw his arms around Roy, holding on stubbornly. Roy couldn't break loose. He was pretty well winded. "Get this mooch off me," Roy yelled. I hit the man twice in the face. His grip loosened and he fell to his knees. "Kick his head off," said Roy. I kicked the man in the side and felt a rib snap. The man put his hand to his head. "Help," he shouted. He did not try to get up. "Let's cut," I said. As the far end of the platform, I heard a police whistle. The man was still lying there on the platform, holding his side and yelling, "Help," at regular intervals. There was a slight drizzle of rain falling. When I hit the street, I slipped and skidded on the wet sidewalk. We were standing by a closed filing station, looking back at the elevated. "Let's go," I said. "They'll see us." We can't stay here. We started to walk. I noticed that my mouth was bone dry. Roy took 2 goofballs from his shirt pocket. Mouth's too dry, he said. I can't swallow them. We went on walking. There's sure to be an alarm out for us, Roy said. Keep a lookout for cars. We'll duck in the bushes if any come along. They'll be figuring us to get back on the subway, so the best thing we can do is keep walking. The drizzle continued. Dogs barked at us as we walked. Remember our story if we get nailed, Roy said. We fell asleep and we woke up at the end of the line. This is the guy accused of us taking his money. We were scared, so we knocked him down and ran. They'll beat the shit out of us. You'll have to expect that. Here comes a car, I said. Yellow lights too. We crawled into the bushes at the side of the road and crouched down behind a sideboard. The car drove slowly by. We started walking again. I was getting sick and wondered if I would get home to the MS I'd stashed in my apartment. When we get closer in, we better split up, Roy said. Out here we might be able to do each other some good. If we run into a cop on the beat, we'll tell him we've been with some girls and we're looking for the subway. This rain is a break. The cops will be in. We'll all be in some all-night joint drinking coffee. For Christ's sake, he said irritably, don't run like that. I turned around and looked over my shoulder. It's natural to turn around, I said. Natural for thieves. We finally ran into the B&T line and rode back to Manhattan. Roy said, I don't think I'm just speaking for myself when I say I'm scared. Oh, here's your cut. He handed me $3. Next day I told him I was through as a lush worker. I don't blame you, he said, but you get the wrong impression. You're bound to get some good breaks if you stick around long enough. My case came to trial in special sessions. I drew a 4-month suspended sentence. After I gave up lush working, I decided to push junk. There isn't much money in it. All a street peddler the addict can expect to do is keep up his habit. But at least when you're pushing, you have a good supply of junk on hand, and that gives a feeling of security. Of course, some people do make money pushing. I knew an Irish pusher who had started out capping a quarter-ounce envelope of H, and 2 years later, when he took a fall and went away for 3 years, he had $30,000, an apartment building in Brooklyn. If you want to push, the first step is to find a wholesale connection. I did not have a connection, so I formed a partnership with Bill Gaines, who had a pretty fair Italian connection to the Lower East Side. We bought the stuff for $90 per quarter ounce, cut it 1/3 with milk or sugar, and put it in 1-grain caps. The caps sold for $2 each retail. They ran about 10 to 16% H, which was very high for retail cap stuff. There should be at least 100 caps and 1/4 ounce of H before it's cut. But if the wholesaler is Italian, he's almost sure to give it a short count. We usually got about 80 caps out of these Italian quarter ounces. Bill Gaines came up from a good family, as I recall. His father had been a bank president somewhere in Maryland, and he had front. Gaines's routine was stealing overcoats out of restaurants, and he was perfectly adapted to this work. The American upper-middle-class citizen is a composite of negatives. He is largely delineated by what he is not. Gaines went further. He was not merely negative. He was positively invisible, a vague, respectable presence. There is a certain kind of ghost that can only materialize with the aid of a sheet or other piece of cloth to give it an outline. Gaines was like that. He materialized in someone else's overcoat. Gaines had a malicious, childlike smile that formed a shocking contrast to his eyes, which were pale blue, lifeless and old. He smiled and listened down into himself as if attending to someone that had pleased him. Sometimes after a shot he would smile and say slyly, "This stuff is powerful." With the same smile he would report on the deterioration and misfortunes of others. Herman was a beautiful kid when he first came to York. The trouble is, he lost his looks. Gaines was one of the few junkies who really took a special pleasure in seeing non-users get a habit. Many junk pushers are glad to see a new addict for economic reasons. If you have a commodity, you naturally want customers, provided they are the right kind. But Gaines liked to invite young kids up to his room and give them a shot, usually compounded of old cottons, and then watch the effects, smiling his little smile. Mostly the kids say it was a good kick and that was all. Just another kick like Nemby's or Benny's or Lush or Weed. But a few stayed around to get hooked, and Gaines would look at these converts and smile, prelate of drunk. A little later you would hear him say, "Really, so-and-so must realize that I can't carry him any longer." The pledge was no longer being rushed. It was time for him to pay off, and pay off for the rest of his life, waiting on street corners and in cafeterias for the connection the mediator between man and junk. Gaines was a mere parish priest in the hierarchy of junk. He would speak of the higher-ups in a voice of sepulchral awe. The connections, they say. His veins were mostly gone, retreated back to the bone to escape the probing needle. For a while he used arteries, which are deeper than veins and harder to hit, and for this procedure he bought special long needles. He rotated from his arms and hands to the veins of his feet. The vein would come back in time. Even so, he had to shoot in the skin almost half the time, but he only gave up and skinned a shot after an agonizing half an hour of probing and poking and cleaning out the needle, which caught up with blood. One of my first customers was a village character named Nick. Nick painted when he did anything. His canvases were very small and looked as if they had been concentrated, compressed, misshapen by tremendous pressure. The product of a depraved mind, an narcotic agent pronounced solemnly after viewing one of Nick's pictures. Nick was always half sick, his large, plaintive brown eyes watering slightly and his thin nose running. He slept on couches in the apartments of friends, existing on the precarious indulgence of neurotic, unstable, stupidly suspicious individuals who would suddenly throw him out without reason or warning. For these people he also scored, hoping that he would receive in return at least a head off a cap to take the edge off his constant junk hunger. Often he got nothing but a casual thanks, the purchaser having convinced himself that Nick had somehow got his on the other end. As a result, Nick began stealing a small amount from each cap, loosening up the junk so that it would fill the cap. There was not much left of Nick. His constant, unsatisfied hunger had burned out all other concerns. He talked vaguely about going to Lexington for the cure, or shipping out in the merchant marine, or buying paregoric in the Connecticut and tapering off with it. Nick introduced me to Tony, who tended bar in a village bar and restaurant. Tony had been pushing and nearly got nailed when the Federals rushed into his apartment. He barely had time to throw a 16th-ounce packet of H on the piano. The Federals found nothing but his works, and they let him go. Tony was scared and quit pushing. He was a young Italian who obviously knew his way around. He looked capable of keeping his mouth shut. A good type of customer. I went to Tony's bar every day and ordered a Coca-Cola. Tony would tell me about how many caps he wanted, and I would go into the phone booth or the WC and grab his caps or silver paper, and wrap his caps up in silver paper. When I got back to my Coke, the money for the caps was there on the bar like change. I dropped the caps into an ashtray onto the bar, and Tony emptied the ashtray under the bar, taking out the caps. This routine was necessary because the owner knew Tony had been a user and told him to stay off the stuff or get another job. In fact, the owner's son was a user, at this time in a sanitarium taking the cure. When he got out, he came straight to me to buy stuff. He said he couldn't stay off. A young Italian hipster named Ray used to come to this bar every day. He seemed okay, so I took care of him, too, dropping his caps on the ashtray with Tony's. This bar where Tony worked was a small place down several steps from street level. There was only one door. I always felt trapped when I went in there. The place gave me such a feeling of depression and danger that I could hardly bring myself to go through the door. After taking care of Tony and Ray, I generally met Nick in a cafeteria on 6th Avenue. He always had the price of a few caps on him. I knew, of course, that he was scoring for other people, but I did not know who they were. I should have known better than have dealings with anybody like Nick, who was sick and broke all the time and therefore liable to pick up anybody's money. Some people need an intermediary to score for them because they are strangers in town, or because they have not been on junk long enough to get acquainted. But the pusher has reason to be wary of people who send someone else to score. By and large, the reason a man can't score is because he is known to be wrong. So he sends someone else to score who may not be wrong himself, but simply desperate for junk. To score from a stool pigeon is definitely not ethical. Often a man goes on from scoring from pigeons to becoming a pigeon himself. I was not in a position to turn money down. I had no margin. Every day I had to sell enough caps to buy the next quarter ounce, and I was never more than a few dollars ahead. So I took whatever money Nick had and asked no questions. I went into pushing with Bill Gaines and handled the uptown business. I met Bill in an 8th Avenue cafeteria after I finished up in the village. He had a few good customers. Izzy, probably his best, had a job as a cook on a tugboat in a New York harbor. He was one of the 103rd Street boys. Izzy had done time for pushing, was known as a thoroughly right guy, and he had some steady source of income. This is a perfect customer. Sometimes Izzy showed up with his partner Goldie, who worked on the same boat. Goldie was a thin, hook-nosed man with skin drawn tight over his face and a spot of colour on each cheekbone. Another of Izzy's friends was a young ex-paratrooper named Maddie, a husky, handsome, hard-faced young man who had borne none of the marks of a drug addict. There were also two whores that Bill took care of. Generally, whores are not a good deal. They attract heat, and most of them will talk. Bill insisted these particular whores were okay. Another of our customers was old Bart. He took a few caps every day which he sold on commission. I didn't know his customers, but I didn't worry about it. Bart was okay. If there was beef, he would take the rap without talking. Anyway, he had 30 years of experience in junk and knew what he was doing. When I arrived at the cafeteria where we had our meat, there was Bill sitting at the table, his skinny frame huddled in someone else's overcoat. Old Bart, shabby and inconspicuous, was dunking a donut in his coffee. Bill told me that he'd already taken care of Izzy, so I gave Bart 10 caps to sell, and Bill and I took a cab to my apartment. There we had a shot and checked over the stock, setting aside $90 for the next quarter ounce. After Bill got a shot, a little colour crept into his face, and he would become almost coy. It was a gruesome sight. I remember once he told me how he'd been propositioned by a queer who offered him $20. Bill declined, saying, "I don't think you would be very well satisfied." Bill twitched his fleshless hips. "You should see me in the nude," he said. "I'm really cute." One of Bill's most tasteful conversation routines consisted of detailed bulletins on the state of his bowels. Sometimes it gets so I have to reach my fingers in and pull it out. Hard as porcelain, you understand. The pain is terrible. "Listen," I said, "These connection keeps giving us a short count. I only got 80 caps out of the best batch after the last batch after it was cut." "Well, you can't expect too much. If I could go to a hospital and get a good enema, but they won't do a thing for you unless you check into hospital, and of course, I can't do that. They keep you at least 24 hours. I told them, "You're supposed to be in a hospital. I'm not. I'm in pain and I need treatment. Why can't you just call an attendant?" And there was no stopping him. When people started talking about their bowel movements, they were inexorable in the process of which they speak. Things went on like this for several weeks. One by one, Nick's contacts located me. They were tired of scoring through Nick and having him steal the head off their caps. What a crew. Mooches, fags, four flushers, stool pigeons, bums, unwilling to work, unable to steal, always short of money, always whining for credit. In the whole lot, there was no one who wouldn't get wilt and spilled as soon as they come. Someone belted him in the mouth and said, "Where did you get it?" The worst of the lot was Gene Dooley, a scrawny little Irishman with a manner of between fag and pimp. Gene was informer to the bone. He probably pulled out dirty lists of people. His hands were always dirty, and read them off to the law. You could see him bustling into a black and tan headquarters during the Irish trouble, in a dirty grey toga, turning in Christians, giving information to the Gestapo, the GPU, sitting in a cafeteria talking to narcotics agent. Always the same thin, ratty face, shabby, out-of-date clothes, whiny, penetrating voice. The most unbearable thing about Gene was his voice. It went all through you. The voice was my first knowledge of his existence. Nick had just arrived at my apartment with some score money when I was called to the hall phone by the buzzer. "I'm Gene Dooley," said the voice. "I'm waiting for Nick. I've been waiting a long time." His voice went up on "long time" to a shrill, grating whine. I said, "Well, he's here now. I expect you will see him directly," and I hung up. Next day, Dooley called me again. "I'm just around the corner from your place. You mind if I come on over? It's cooler for me to meet you alone." He hung up before I could say anything, and 10 minutes later he was standing in the door. When one person meets another for the first time, there is a period of mutual examination on the intuitive level of empathy and identification. But it was impossible to relate oneself to Dooley in any way. He was simply the focal point for a hostile, intrusive force. You could feel him walk right into your psyche and look around to see if anything was there that he could make use of. I stepped back a little from the door to avoid contact with him. He squeezed himself into the room and immediately sat down on the couch and lit a cigarette. "It's better to meet alone like this." His smile was ambiguously sexual. "Nick is a very uncool guy." He stood up and handed me $4. "Do you mind if I take off here?" he said, pulling off his coat. I never heard anyone else use this expression. For in the same moment I thought he was making advances. He dropped his coat on the couch and rolled up his sleeve. I brought him 2 caps and a glass of water. He had his own works, for which I was grateful. I watched him as he hit a vein, pressed the dropper, and rolled down the sleeve. When you are hooked, the effects of a shot are not dramatic. But the observer who knows what to look for can see the immediate working of junk in the blood and cells of another user. But in Dooley I could detect no change whatsoever. He put on his coat and picked up the cigarette which had been smouldering in an ashtray. He looked at me with his pale blue eyes that seemed to have no depth at all. They looked artificial. "Let me tell you something," he said. "You're making a big mistake to trust Nick. A few nights ago I was in Thompson's cafeteria and I ran into Rogers, the agent. He told me, 'I know Nick is scoring for all the goddamn junkies here in the village. You're getting good stuff too, between 16 and 20%. Well, you can tell Nick this. We can take him any time we want, and when we do catch up to him, he's going to work with us. He's up for me once. He'll do it again. We're going to find out where this stuff is coming from.'" Dooley looked at me and sucked on his cigarette. "When they get Nick, they'll get you. You better let Nick know that if he talks, you'll have him poured into a barrel of concrete and dumped in the East River. I don't need to tell you anymore. You can see what the situation is." He looked at me, trying to gauge the effect of his words. It was impossible to tell just how much of the story I was expected to believe. Perhaps it was just a roundabout way of saying, "How will you ever know who fingered you? With Nick such an obvious suspect, as if I talked to you, you could never be sure, could you now?" "Could you let me have 1 cap on credit?" he asked. "What I've just told you should be worth something." I gave him a cap and he pocketed it without comment. He stood up. "Well, I'll be seeing you. I'll call at this same time tomorrow." He put out a grapevine to see if I could find out anything about Dooley and to check his story. No one knew anything definite about him. Tony the bartender said, "Dooley will think if he has to, but he couldn't give a definite instance." Yes, Nick was known to have talked once, but the facts of this case, in which Dooley was also involved, indicated the tip could just as well come from Dooley. Several days after the Jean Dooley episode, I was coming out of the subway at Washington Square with a thin blonde